My name is Ella, and I am 32 years old, and I live in the city of Chicago, Illinois, where the winters are not just a season, but a test of human endurance and spirit. If you have never lived in Chicago during the month of January, then you might not understand the silent code of the streets that we all live by. It is a city of wind and ice and concrete where people are generally tough and hardworking, but also very protective of their space. I have lived in my apartment building for 5 years now, and I work as a physical therapist, which means I spend my days helping people recover from injuries and regain their strength. It is a job that requires a lot of patience and physical effort, so by the time I get home, I am usually exhausted and looking for some peace and quiet. My apartment is a nice place on the north side of the city, but like most places in this area, it does not come with a private driveway or a designated parking garage. This means that we all have to fight for street parking, which is a daily battle even in the best of weather. When the snow starts to fall, the battle turns into a full-scale war. There is an unwritten rule in Chicago, known as dibs, where if you spend the time and effort to shovel the heavy snow out of a parking spot on the street, you have earned the right to that spot for at least a day or two. People usually mark their spots with old chairs or crates, or even laundry baskets to show that the spot is taken. Most people respect this because they know how hard it is to move hundreds of pounds of frozen white powder just to get your car out of the curb. However, there is always one person who thinks the rules do not apply to them. In my building, that person is Marcus. Marcus is about my age, and he drives a very expensive and very shiny black sedan that he treats like it is made of solid gold. He is the kind of neighbor who never says hello in the hallway and always seems to be looking down his nose at everyone else. He has never been seen holding a shovel in his entire life. He usually just waits for someone else to clear a path, and then he sneaks his car into it like a thief in the night. This story begins on a Tuesday when the sky turned a heavy shade of gray and the weather report predicted a massive blizzard. By the time I got home from work, the snow was already falling in thick, wet flakes that stuck to everything. The wind was howling off Lake Michigan, and the temperature was dropping fast. I knew that by the morning, my sport utility vehicle would be buried under several inches of snow. I have a very reliable four-wheel drive sport utility vehicle that can handle almost anything, but I still have to be able to get it out of the parking space. That night, the storm really hit us hard. I stayed awake listening to the wind rattle my window frames and watching the street lights flicker through the white haze. When I woke up the next morning, the world was completely white. The local news said we had received 8 inches of snow, and the wind chill was well below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I looked out my window and saw that my car was nothing but a large white mound on the side of the road. I knew I had a long day ahead of me. My partner was away on a business trip, so I was on my own to handle the cleanup. I put on my heaviest thermal leggings and my thickest wool socks and my waterproof boots and my heavy down parka. I wrapped a scarf around my face until only my eyes were showing, and I grabbed my heavy-duty metal shovel from the closet. The moment I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It was the kind of cold that makes the hair inside your nose freeze instantly and makes your lungs ache when you breathe in too fast. I started shoveling at 8 o'clock in the morning. The snow was heavy and wet at the bottom, which made every scoop feel like I was lifting a bag of lead. I worked for 45 minutes straight just to clear the area around my tires and create a path to the street. My back was throbbing, and my shoulders felt like they were on fire, but I did not stop, because I knew if I did, the snow would just freeze into solid ice. I finally finished the job, and my parking spot was a beautiful rectangle of gray asphalt surrounded by walls of snow that were 3 feet high. I felt a great sense of accomplishment. I got into my sport utility vehicle and drove to the grocery store because we were low on supplies and I needed to stock up in case the roads got worse. I was gone for exactly 1 hour. I spent that hour navigating through the slushy streets and fighting the crowds at the store to get milk and bread and eggs and some heavy bags of salt. When I turned back onto my street, I was feeling tired but happy that I had my clear spot waiting for me. But as I approached my building, I saw the familiar shape of a shiny black sedan sitting right in the middle of the space I had just spent nearly an hour clearing. My heart sank, and then it started to beat with a hot flash of anger. It was Marcus. I could see him through his window as he was gathering his things to get out of the car. He looked perfectly warm and comfortable while I was still shivering from my earlier labor. I pulled my car up next to him and rolled down my window. I tried to stay calm and polite even though I was steaming inside. I told him that I had just spent an hour shoveling that spot and that I had only been gone for a little while to get groceries. I asked him if he would mind moving his car to one of the many unshoveled spots down the street, since he had a newer car that could probably handle a bit of snow. Marcus did not even look at me at first. He finished checking his phone, and then he slowly looked up with a smirk on his face. He told me that the street is public property and that no one owns a parking spot on a public road. He said that if I wanted a guaranteed spot, I should have bought a house with a private driveway. He told me he was not moving and that I should just find somewhere else to park. Then he got out of his car and locked it with his remote key, making a loud honking sound that felt like a slap in the face. He walked into the building without looking back. I was stunned. I sat there in my car, with my engine idling, feeling the rage build up inside me. I had to drive 3 blocks away to find a spot that was not completely buried, and even then I had to use the power of my 4-wheel drive to force my way into a pile of slush. I then had to carry 4 heavy bags of groceries for 3 blocks in the freezing wind. By the time I got to my front door, my fingers were numb and I was shaking with fury. I am a nice person by nature, but Marcus had pushed me too far. I went into my kitchen and put my groceries away, but I could not stop thinking about that black sedan sitting in my hard-earned spot. I looked out my window and saw his car looking so smug and clean in the spot I had sweated for. That was when the idea hit me. I remembered my high school science class and how water behaves in extreme cold. The temperature outside was currently 5 degrees, and it was expected to drop even lower during the night. I realized that Marcus might have the legal right to park on a public street, but he did not have the right to be a jerk without consequences. I went to my utility closet and found 2 large empty plastic gallon jugs that used to hold distilled water. I filled them both with lukewarm water from my kitchen sink. I did not want the water to be boiling because I did not want to crack his windshield, but I wanted it to be warm enough that it would spread smoothly before it turned into ice. I put on my coat and boots again and headed back out into the cold. The street was quiet, and most people were tucked away in their warm homes. I walked up to the black sedan, and I poured the first gallon of water directly onto the front windshield. I watched as the water ran down the glass and into the crevices around the wipers and the hood. Because it was so cold, the water began to turn into a thick, slushy glaze almost instantly. I poured the second gallon over the driver's side door handle and the lock mechanism. I went back inside and refilled the jugs. I did this over and over again. I must have made 5 trips back and forth from my kitchen to the street. In total, I poured 10 gallons of water all over his car. I focused on the windshield and the side windows and the door seals and the door handles. I even poured some over the headlights and the side mirrors. With every gallon, I felt a little bit of my anger melt away. By the time I was finished with the 10th gallon, the car looked like it had been encased in a thick layer of transparent armor. It was not just a light dusting of frost. It was a solid, thick sheet of ice that was probably half an inch thick in some places. The water had seeped into the gaps between the doors and the frame, and I knew that once it froze solid, those doors were not going to open without a massive amount of heat or effort. I went back into my apartment and made myself a hot cup of tea. I sat by the window and watched the street. It was a very satisfying sight. The streetlights caught the ice on the black sedan and made it sparkle like a diamond. It looked beautiful in a way, but I knew it was a nightmare for anyone who needed to drive it. I went to bed that night feeling a sense of peace that I had not felt since the snow started falling. I woke up the next morning at 7 o'clock because I knew Marcus usually left for work around 7:30. I made a large pot of coffee and took my position at the window with my binoculars. The sun was just starting to come up, and the sky was a clear, piercing blue. The temperature had dropped to -10 degrees overnight, which was perfect for my plan. At exactly 7:35, the front door of the building opened, and Marcus walked out. He was dressed in a very expensive-looking wool coat, and he was carrying a leather briefcase. He looked like he was ready to conquer the world. He walked confidently toward his car, but as he got closer, his pace slowed down. He stopped about 5 feet away from the sedan and just stared at it. From my window, I could see his confusion. He probably thought it was just some weird weather event at first, but then he looked at the other cars on the street. None of the other cars had a thick coating of ice on them. They were all covered in light, fluffy snow, but his car was a solid block of ice. I watched as he reached into his pocket and pressed the button on his key fob. I could see the lights on the car flash under the ice, but the doors did not unlock. Well, the locks probably clicked, but the ice was holding the doors shut. He tried the driver's side door handle, and it did not budge. He pulled harder, and I thought he might actually break the plastic handle off. He then walked around to the passenger side and tried that handle too, but it was the same story. He was trapped outside of his own car. He looked around the street with a look of pure frustration, and then he went to the back of his car to get his ice scraper out of the trunk. But of course the trunk was also frozen shut. He had no tools and no way to get into the car. He started trying to pick at the ice with his fingernails, but he gave that up pretty quickly because it was far too cold for that. Then he tried to use his credit card to scrape the windshield. I almost spilled my coffee, I was laughing so hard. Seeing a grown man in a $1,000 coat trying to scrape half an inch of solid ice with a plastic credit card was the best entertainment I had seen in years. He spent 20 minutes out there in the freezing wind trying everything he could think of. He even tried to breathe on the door lock to melt the ice, but the wind was too strong and it did not do anything. Finally, he realized he was going to be very late for whatever important meeting he had. He looked defeated. He took out his phone and made a call, and a few minutes later a ride-share vehicle pulled up to the curb. He got in and left his frozen black sedan sitting right there in my shoveled spot. I felt like I had won the lottery. But the revenge was not over yet. I knew that the ice would stay there as long as the temperature stayed below freezing, which the forecast said would be for the next 3 days. I decided to be a little bit more helpful. Every evening for the next 2 days when the sun went down, I went out with 2 more gallons of water and added another layer to the ice. I wanted to make sure that even if there was a slight bit of sun during the day, the ice would not melt away. I became a master of ice sculpture. I made sure the ice was especially thick over the keyhole and the seams of the doors. On the 3rd day, the weather finally warmed up to about 35 degrees. I watched from my window as Marcus returned with a large bucket of hot water and a heavy-duty ice chopper he must have bought at the hardware store. He spent 2 hours hacking away at the ice. He looked miserable. His expensive coat was soaked, and he was huffing and puffing from the effort. He had to be very careful not to scratch his precious paint job, which made the process take even longer. Every time he managed to break off a large chunk of ice, I felt a little surge of joy. When he finally got the driver's side door open, he looked like he wanted to cry. He got inside and tried to start the engine, but the car was so cold that it struggled to turn over at first. When it finally started, he had to sit there for another 30 minutes waiting for the defroster to melt the remaining ice on the windshield so he could actually see where he was going. While he was waiting, I decided to go outside to get my mail. I walked past his car, and I made sure to give him a big friendly smile. I asked him if he was having some trouble with the ice, and I remarked that it was such a strange thing how only his car seemed to get hit by the freezing rain. He looked at me with a look of deep suspicion, but he could not prove anything. I told him that it was a shame he had to spend so much time cleaning his car when he could have been inside where it was warm. I also mentioned that I had found a great parking spot 3 blocks away that was completely clear of ice. He did not say a word to me. He just glared and turned up his radio. After that day, Marcus never took my shoveled parking spot again. In fact, he started parking in the expensive parking garage 2 blocks away, where he had to pay a monthly fee. I think he decided that the free street parking was not worth the risk of another mysterious ice storm. The other neighbors in the building seemed to notice what happened too. They never saw me do it, but they are smart people, and they could put 2 and 2 together. Now whenever I shovel a spot, I put my 2 orange plastic chairs in it, and nobody touches them. There is a new level of respect on our block. Some people might say that what I did was mean, or that I was being a jerk, but in Chicago, you have to stand up for yourself. Shoveling snow is hard work, and taking someone else's labor for your own benefit is the ultimate sign of disrespect. I did not damage his car or break any laws. I just provided a little bit of extra hydration to his vehicle in very cold weather. If the laws of physics decided to turn that water into a solid barrier, that is not my fault. It has been several years since that winter, and I still think about it every time the first snowflake hits the ground. It serves as a reminder that being kind and respectful to your neighbors is always the best policy, because you never know who might have 10 gallons of water and a very long memory. I still drive my sport utility vehicle, and I still shovel my own spots. I even help some of the older neighbors with their cars now because I have the strength and the tools to do it. but Marcus moved out about a year ago, and I cannot say that I miss him. The new neighbor in 4B is a very nice woman who actually helps me shovel when it snows, and we always make sure to save spots for each other. It is much better to live in a community where people look out for one another instead of trying to take advantage of each other. But if I ever encounter another Marcus, I know exactly what to do. The city of Chicago, Illinois is a beautiful place, but it can be very cold, and sometimes you just have to match that coldness with a little bit of icy justice of your own. I have learned that revenge does not have to be loud or violent to be effective. Sometimes the quietest revenge is the one that stays frozen in someone's memory for a very long time. I remember the sound of his credit card scraping against that windshield every time I hear a cold wind blow, and it always brings a smile to my face. I am 32 years old and I have many more winters ahead of me, but I am not worried. I have my shovel and I have my water jugs, and I have the knowledge that I can handle whatever the world or my neighbors throw at me. It is important to be a good person, but it is also important to show people that they cannot walk all over you. That is the lesson I learned that winter, and it is one I will never forget. The wind may howl and the snow may fall, but as long as I have my dignity and a clear parking spot, I will be just fine. I hope Marcus is enjoying his expensive parking garage, and I hope he thinks of me every time he sees a clear blue sky on a freezing cold morning. It was the most work I have ever put into being petty, and it was worth every single drop of water. I did not need an apology or a thank you, I just needed him to learn that his actions have consequences. Now when I walk down my street and see the neat rows of cars and the chairs marking the shoveled spots, I feel a sense of order and fairness. We are all in this together against the elements, and we have to play by the rules. If you do not want to shovel, do not take a spot that someone else cleared. It is a simple rule that makes life easier for everyone. And if you choose to break that rule well, you might just find your car looking like an ice cube the next morning. I am glad I stood my ground, and I am glad I did it in a way that was clever and safe. It made that long, cold winter a little bit warmer for me, and a lot colder for the man who thought he could take whatever he wanted. That is the end of my story, but the spirit of Chicago Dibs lives on in every shoveled spot and every orange chair you see on the side of the road. Be kind to your neighbors and always keep a few extra gallon jugs in your closet, because you never know when you might need them.